Hello and welcome to Amrita by the Book. My name is Amrita. This is my booktube, and there is a pigeon right outside my window that will not shut up and is going to end up as fricassee or something. Anyway, I'm here today to do the last 10 books book tag, which I was tagged to do by Rosie. And for those of you who are new here, you should know that I love Rosie. I love her channel. I love the books that she reads, the way she talks about them. It's always interesting, and she was one of my very earliest booktube friends, and I'm always happy to be tagged by her. And for those of you who are regulars, you already know Rosie and you know that she's awesome. I'm going to link down to her channel below, and you should all check it out. The first question is the last book I DNF'd. And this one, very sadly, was The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon, which is a book that I was really excited about when I heard about it. But then for some reason, I couldn't really get past the 15% mark or so. Like, I didn't even get to the 25% mark, which is usually where I DNF. I just tried and tried and tried, and I have to say that I think this is something to do with me. I don't think it's a knock on the book itself. I've seen a lot of people whose opinions I respect say that they really enjoyed this book, and I have a friend who tried and found it really difficult at first, but then once it got going, she said she really loved it. So I don't want to discourage people from trying out this book. I've heard very good things about it. It's just that I never got to that point before I DNF'd. I might go back to it at some point, but as it stands right now, it's really low on my list. And I'm calling it a DNF because I don't have any firm intentions of picking it back up. Number 2 is the last book I reread, and that has to be Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan, which is the last book in the Wheel of Time series that was written by Robert Jordan. The next 3 books in the series were completed by Brandon Sanderson, who was working of these notes that Jordan left behind. This is one of my favorite books just for the Matt sections, because this is where Matt and Tuon are having their relationship crystallize, and Tuon really comes to understand who Matt is as a person. And when I say I reread, I don't usually reread anything like cover to cover. I usually end up just rereading my favorite bits, and for me this one was all about like Tuon and Matt and their sections, so that's what I reread. Number 3 is the last book I bought, and this was the autobiography of Alice B Talkless by Gertrude Stein for the March of the Moderns, which is a month-long event that is going on right now, and it's organized by Margaret Pinard. I'm going to link down to her channel below. And this is a, I guess it's a readathon would be the best way to explain it, but it's just people reading books that were published in the modernist period, so 1901 to roughly 1950 or so. Margaret explains it much better than I can, but basically this is a book that I've been meaning to read for a long time, but I don't know, like Stein for me is one of those people whom I both enjoy reading, but I don't miss when she's not around. So I never quite remember to pick up one of her books and start reading it unless I'm in some kind of environment or context where other people are like, oh, like we're reading this, do you want to join? So it's been a long time since I read her, and I have always wanted to read this particular book and somehow never gotten around to it. So this particular time I was looking at the things that other people were reading, and it's a really interesting and varied list. But I was like, oh, you know what, this is a really great time for me to pick up this particular book. And so I did. I'm filming this way in advance, so I can't tell you how I feel about it because I'll be reading it March onwards. But yeah, I'm really excited for it as of now. The last book I said I'd read and didn't. Now, I usually don't lie about things like that because why would I? Like, who am I trying to impress? But I did do it once that I can remember, and I remember it very clearly because it was a really bad time in my life. It was winter, a bunch of different things were happening in my life. I was really sad. It was basically one of my cycles of depression, and I didn't know what to do with myself other than veg out on the couch and watch TCM from morning till night. Like, my roommate must have been so sick of me at that time because she'd go for work and then she'd come back, and I'd literally be sitting in the same place cuddling with her cats and just watching Turner Classic Movies. But I really couldn't be bothered to do anything. I didn't fail any of my my classes that semester, but that's because I'm really good at, just doing things last minute. But I definitely wasn't an A student that semester, and I'm usually an A student. And most of my professors were really nice about it, but I had this one professor, and he was very new, and he was like a young adjunct or something, and I didn't know him very well. And instead of just going up to him and being like, hey, like, I'm just having a rough time, which I'd done with like my other professors, because I knew them, but I didn't know him well enough to go up to him and tell him anything personal. So I just decided to fake it, and it was a really hard class to fake because it was a post-colonial literature class, and we were in the midst of some really heavy reading. There was this book about the Middle Passage, and I don't really remember the name of it now. I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. But it was just, the author trying to inhabit the minds of these people who were enslaved on a ship crossing the Atlantic, and watching the old, the infirm, and the elderly just being thrown overboard. And like, there were passages of them just like dying and floating through the water, and having these spiritual, I don't even know what. And it was really heavy, and it was 100% not something that I could handle. Which sounds like a really wussy thing to say because, real people went through that experience and they survived it. And here I am, like 200, 300 years later, being like, oh no, I can't read it. Wah, Amrita, so sad. But you know what? That's how things work, your brain chemistry just works that way. So I'm gonna cut myself a bit of slack for it. But I just pretended like I'd read it, and then I wrote like some kind of bullshit essay about it. And the one thing I can do is write. So I managed to eke out a B, but there was a flash quiz one day, which is not something that we really did at my school. But this professor, he had just come from like Yale, and I guess like that's what they do at Yale. And he did a pop quiz, and I bit it like hard. And it taught me a valuable lesson, right? Like, don't lie to your professors. Just have that difficult conversation. It's just better for everybody, like it cuts down on so much time and grief for everyone. But no, I didn't tell him even then. I was just like, I don't know, like I guess I wasn't paying close attention. Next is the last book that I wrote in the margins of, and that is not something that I usually do, but I think it was the presentation of self in everyday life, which is a very influential book written by Irving Goffman, and it was the central text for my master's thesis, and I had to take like lots of notes, and there was a lot of close reading involved, and that would be it. Generally though, I prefer to take notes, like not in the margins. Like in the margins is usually me marking something, like here is a section of text, and then I'll just put a little post-it in or something to mark it. But my notes are extensive, and I tend to write them up in a separate notebook, which is a practice that was taught to me by one of my favorite teachers in undergrad. She was my post-colonial literature professor, and I took most of her classes in that module. And she was a real, like, she was a really good teacher. Like, she knew her subject. She was very leftist, and she was one of those people who went to South Africa. She's British, and she went to South Africa and she'd smuggle in books for people to read, and then she'd smuggle out like manuscripts written by black activists to be published in Britain. And like a real like person that did things. And she basically made us all maintain these notes in a separate book. And at the time I didn't really understand what she was doing because I was young and stupid, but it was basically just really great practice in how to do a close reading and maintain your notes. So if any of you are out there in school right now, I highly recommend the practice. The last book I had signed, I don't really get my books signed. I don't think I've even bought a book that was previously signed and available. Like, I don't particularly understand the whole concept. Is it to like meet your idols? Because I don't have idols. The only time that I considered it, I used to live in Manhattan, and my apartment was just around the corner from the Barnes & Noble on Union Square, which was this giant Barnes & Noble where they used to have all these signings. Like the major signings that happened in New York City happened in that particular Union Square outlet, which I don't think even exists anymore because, 2021. But early on, I think Robert Jordan came for a book signing, and I think it might have been for The Knife of Dreams, I'm not sure, but it was for one of his last two books. And I was there, and I didn't go up to him to get my copy signed. Like, I went for the book signing and I was there while he was talking, and it was great and I enjoyed it, and it's one of my favorite memories. But I didn't go up to get it signed because A, the queue was hellishly long, and B, like I said, I don't particularly want an autograph by anybody. So I don't want to get my photo taken with anybody. I don't want to get an autograph. I don't particularly want any of those things, so I didn't do it. But now in retrospect, I kind of feel bad that I didn't, because I didn't know that he was going to pass away shortly thereafter. And so that was possibly my last chance to just go up to him and tell him how much I enjoyed his work. But like, if I hadn't gone for that book signing, then again, like, I would have had no opportunity to tell him that. So c'est la vie. What is the last book that I lost? I actually lost a bunch of books in several moves because my mother has this habit of packing things and then just packing them really badly, and it's on me. Like, I should probably have taken more of an interest in how my books were being bundled up, but I was either not in India, or I wasn't around when she was doing it, or I'm just an entitled Indian kid, so it never occurred to me. And I was well served because I lost a bunch of books to like mold and stuff. But I think the one that I remember is my grandfather had a copy of Karl Marx's Das Kapital, and I needed it for something in my thesis or in like some kind of pitch that I was writing or something. I can't remember what it was, but I wanted to refer to it, and I remember that book. It was like this hardcover giant book, and we've had it for years and years and years, like ever since my dad sold off his old house, like his childhood home. So we'd had it, and I couldn't find it, and I think we lost it in one of the moves, and that really sucks because it was a really great edition. And I just remember it as being like a mainstay of my childhood. I don't think my dad really cared about it because he's incredibly anti-communist, but it mattered to me. And so the last book I had to replace was also Das Kapital by Karl Marx, because I really needed it. And you should have seen my dad's expression when I ordered it and he saw me like get it out, and he was, because he's always interested in the books that I buy. But this was like an 1-2 punch, because the book that I'd ordered right before Das Kapital was this book by my friend Anila Babar, which was about Islam and women in Pakistan. And that's a very interesting book also, like if that's something that you're interested in or have wondered about, or my saying this makes you wonder about it, you should get this book. It's very interesting. And I had like that, and I had Das Kapital, and my dad was just like, take this off my coffee table. And I was like, okay. Next is the last book I had an argument over, and I am honestly not that kind of person. I don't argue over books. Like if you like something, you like it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's on you. But I actually, this made me remember a time way back in the day, like when I was blogging, and somebody was in my comments being very argumentative and telling me that I was wrong and that they couldn't believe how wrong I was, etc. And I was like, okay, well, those are your feelings, what can I do about it? And he got so upset. He was like, why won't you debate me? And I was like, not gonna do that, sorry. You can have all the debates you want with yourself or with whatever facsimile of myself that you have in your head, but I have something called a life, so no, I'm not gonna do that. But I did stop to think about if I'd ever had an argument in maybe school about any particular text, and I think we had a very lively debate once about The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. I can't really remember who with or why, but it was one of those classes that I took about race, I think, and we were talking about slavery and capitalism, and somehow we ended up discussing The Wealth of Nations as well, which was a book that we were reading for the course as well. So I can't remember what the class was or why we were talking about slavery, capitalism, and The Wealth of Nations, but I remember things got really heated, and there were no victors, and the teacher literally had to call time because we were all just screaming at each other. And number 10 is the last book I couldn't get a hold of, and this is not for me per se, but it is for my friends who don't live in India. Rosie herself was talking about how she was trying to get this book by Nisha Susan, who's a friend of mine, called The Women Who Forgot to Invent Facebook and Other Stories, and it's a short story collection, and she thought it sounded great, but she couldn't find an ebook copy, and the physical copies were too expensive in Canada. And so I had to I tweeted at Nisha, and we were talking about like international rights and things, but eventually I think like maybe next year or something, Nisha thinks that there might be like a North American version out. And I think it's the same for this other book that I was really chuffed about, which is called Murder at the Mushaira by Raza Mir. And I don't really know Raza at all, like he's not a friend of mine or anything, but he's a friend of a friend, and I didn't know that when I came across his book, and I bought a copy of it. I haven't read it yet, but I'm really interested in it. It's a historical murder mystery set right before what Indians call the First War of Independence and the British call the Mutiny of 1857. And the lead protagonist is Mirza Ghalib, who is one of the greatest poets in the Urdu language. And literally, like, anyone who has ever read any Urdu poetry ever has read Ghalib. And in Mir's version, he becomes a detective. So, there's revolution in the air, there's all kinds of things happening, and then there's a murder, and there's Mirza Ghalib who needs to solve this murder. And it sounds amazing. I've always said that I want to see more books that are set, like historical fiction, but historical murder mysteries especially, that are set outside of England. So I'm really delighted to have bought this book, and it is not available outside of India as yet. And I don't know Razamir personally or well enough to just text him and be like, hey, what's the status with your international rights? And I tried tweeting at Aleph Book Company, which is the publisher, and they absolutely ignored me. So I guess the social media game isn't that strong. But yeah, I don't know how or where people living outside India can find it, but it's so disheartening and annoying when things like that happen, because I've had at least 4 different people text me and be like, oh, we saw your reel about, this book and it sounds amazing, where can you find it? And I'm just like, India? It annoys me when I am doing the publicity for a book and the people who publish the book and want to make money off it. And this is not this is not a slam on Raza. This is really a slam on the publisher, because you got to do a better job of negotiating international rights and things, because in this day and age, people want to read things from around the world, and you have to take that into consideration. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass, like, the things that are happening in publishing that I don't know about, but whatever it is, like, it just annoys me. Especially with ebooks. Like, I can understand if hardcovers and paperbacks are difficult to sell internationally, but ebooks, come on. Right, I'm gonna tag a bunch of different people for this. One is Katie Reads and Rants, who literally does goes to 500 books at a time. So I'm sure she has a bunch of options. I'm gonna do Book Binge, because I know she's doing a bunch of different readathons and things. I'm gonna do Literary Lizzie, because I haven't tagged her in a while. I'm gonna tag Literary Kari, and I am gonna tag Eliza Baum. So that's 5 more channels that you should check out, because they are awesome. Thank you all for watching, and I wish you very happy reading until next time. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.